Hello and welcome to part 3 of the retro style ray gun. If you like my content, a like and subscribe would be awesome. You know what to do. Let's crack on. So back in Blender, let's revisit the scope that we modeled in part 2 and refine this clamp because it was a little bit janky. So let's just zoom in here. You can see there we've got some not perfectly curved aesthetics. So we'll just select that one there, tap into edit mode. You can see we've got the mirror modifier. So let's switch to vertex mode, go to wireframe. Let's just manipulate these a little bit here and there. Let's bring that down just a touch. So bear in mind the gap between the edges. So get something a bit sensible in the distances. There you go, that's looking much nicer. That one there I think is a little bit too straight with the one above it and below it. So we'll just shift that in just a little bit, add a bit more curvature. Let's switch back to solid mode, X-ray off, and that's looking pretty cool. Okay, with that done, let's move on to the next part. I'm going to quickly make a change to this, actually the pylon. I keep calling it a pylon, I don't know what it is. So these inner loops here, just select those, and from the side view, we're going to press S for scale and then Shift Y to exclude the Y axis. We don't want it going left and right. So we get a bit more of a rounded edge to those bits there. That's all we need to do there. Let's turn our attention to these button knob things. So there's my quick sketch there. So we've got these ridges down the side of the knobs, and just erase that. And let's start off with the cylinder. I'm not sure whether I should give it 16. Let's try 20 sides. The reason being, I'm trying to bear in mind the ridges that will run down the outside of the button, effectively. So I'm just going to quickly make these adjustments in the options box when I added the cylinder. So we want it about there. And again, just tweaking the size. We can make these adjustments later. Right, switch to solid mode. And I've created one there with no cap fills enabled in the options there, as you can see. Let's go with something like that. And switch that to N-Gon. Now with that, right click and shade smooth. And there's some reference images that I found, and this is the kind of button dial thing that I want to replicate. Not exactly. I'm not going to do the screw that goes through. It's just going to do something like that, similar. Select the top face and press I to inset it. Something like that is good. And the bottom face as well. Just bring that inside. Inset that a little bit as well. Let's add a subdivision modifier. change the levels to 2. Actually, switch to edge mode, select the top edge and the bottom edge and add a mean bevel weight of 1, which is just in the sidebar there. And with doing that, add a bevel modifier, change the shape under profile to 1, segments to 2, and the amount, just give it a little bit of an overlap. So turn wireframe on, of course, so you can see what you're doing there. So something like this is pretty good. That really tightens up those edges. Let's just disable the subdiv modifier for a second. Close the bevel. Select all of these side edges. Leave every other one unselected. In fact, we can do this another way. Let's switch to wireframe mode, select all of these, and then at the top there, select, checker, deselect. Just like magic, that gives us a alternate selection pattern. That's why it's important to go for an even number when you create the segments to the cylinder. With that done, let's switch to the top view by pressing 7 on the numpad and scale those out. But when you do scale it, make sure you press Shift Z or Z. That will stop it from going up and down. So we get something like that. If we turn the subdiv modifier back on, turn the wireframe off, you can see that's looking better already. We need a bit more refinement though to these edges, so I'm going to select all of the other edges now. Oops, there's me not being able to click things. There we go. One more. We're going to press Ctrl B to bevel and add a bit of width to that now. Something like that. That's looking lovely. Let's select these edge loops as well, as we had before. And we'll just bevel those a little bit as well. Okay, so far so good. So with that, let's switch to face mode. Select the top one and press I to inset. Only a little bit because we're going to leave a bit of a gap there. So we can Alt click in there and E to extrude and extrude that down just a little bit. Let's turn the subdiv off so we can see what we're doing. Switch to edge mode and select the inner bottom edges and increase the mean crease this time to 1. And they turn like a pink color. Now select the upper edges, edge loops. So Alt click and Shift Alt click and add a bevel to those with Ctrl B. Just a little bevel is fine. I'm going to increase the shape to 1. And with that done, let's turn the subdiv on. And that's looking really cool. Okay. Now, I want these edges on the outside to go down just a little bit. So let's have a think about how we're going to do that. If I select all of these edges here, the ones that are protruding out, let's continue with the selection. So pick all of the outward pointing ones at the top. Now, if we bring these down, that kind of works, but we're getting this kind of weird look. So it's probably best if we move the whole thing down. But before we do that, let's add a supporting edge loop. So Ctrl R, add an edge loop around there. Using the loop tools, we can make that into a nice circle. So that's an add-on that comes with Blender. Just enable it in the preferences. So you make the selection, right click, loop tools, and so on. Now with that done, we can select the outer edge now and bring it down. So we get a bit of a flat surface and then it dips down, like we saw in the reference photos, something like that. And I'm going to increase the mean bevel weight for that one as well. So that gets a bevel, makes it a little bit sharper. Let's just turn on wireframe to see how that's looking. You may need to adjust the size of the amount of the bevel, just so that we're not getting any overlapping edges. I think that looks fine now. Let's turn the wireframe off. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. Okay, let's add a loop cut or two in the body there, just for some support. Helps with the shading. Switch to the side view, wireframe, select these bottom ones. I think I'm going to move these up just a little bit. I think the button's a bit too thin. So just going to remove those edge loops that I created with Control Delete. That's to dissolve those, and add one edge loop this time, not two. Let's go back to the bottom now. Select the bottom face in edit mode. I'm going to duplicate that and scale it out. Move it down. And there's the other face we copied from. Just delete that one. We don't need that. Place the duplicate edge face somewhere there. You can see it's just below the main dial element. Let's select that face again. Now I'm going to use this one to create the additional piece that goes underneath. Now I'm going to fast forward this because I realized that this didn't turn out the way I expected. So I actually deleted this part and tried again with a better way to do it. So I'll delete that and let's do it again. Let's go to object mode and we'll add the cursor to the active object. I'm going to add a cylinder, make it 16 sides this time. And just bring it down. We just edit that in edit mode, bring that up, delete the top face, add a loop cut with Control R, and bring that down. Now we can select the face loop there and scale it and then press Shift Z so it doesn't scale up and down. So you get something like that now. You get like a saucer shape. Select the top edge and I'm just going to bring that up, tuck it under the dial. You could leave a bit of a gap there, that's fine. Now initially I put it underneath, but I think I ended up pulling it back out again. Let's just turn the wireframe on. You can see there I'm looking at where the boundary of the dial is relative to the part we've just added. Let's switch to face mode. Let's turn off the X-ray. And let's just quickly do some renaming because there's a lot of objects adding up to this project, as you can see there. So after that, let's select the cylinder and then the dial, press Ctrl J, and then now one object. So let's add some mean crease weight to these edges. So when we turn our bevel modifier, they also inherit the modifier properties, of course. So you can see there. Let's increase that to 0.0025 or even 3. I think that's fine. Turn the subdiv modifier back on and you can see that we've got some shading there. So right click and shade smooth. Let's just quickly rename this as well. I'm going to call that knob. You can call it dial. And just check in there that the rotation and scale are at their defaults. But let's just position that where we want this on the ray gun. So let's copy that with Alt D, not Shift D. So it's a linked duplicate. Let's just rotate this one so it's approximately sitting on the body of the ray gun. You just want to pivot around, make sure you look for any gaps. You may want to turn the shadow on in the viewport to see how that looks. And I'm going to switch to local axis. I'm just keeping an eye on the shadow there. So it's just barely touching the top of the body. And the scope clears that quite comfortably. So let's do the same for the bottom one now. So select that. And I've just realized that I wanted to edit this shape a bit more. So I'm going to switch into edit mode, go to wireframe, select these two, well, this bunch of vertices at the top. And because we're still in local axis, that will go nicely up and down local to the axis of the object. Let's add a loop cut there as well. So we get a bit more of a stubbier dial, not as tall. Let's give it a quick look over, see how that looks. That looks fine. Let's position this one now. Switch to the side view with 3 on the numpad. Press R to rotate. Remember, we still have the local axis manipulators there, so that's good. And in the location there, we're going to add something else later, and that's why this has got to be somewhere around here. So just zooming in there and making the rotation a little bit tighter and position that a bit closer to the body. Yeah, can't see any big gaps there. Okay, with that done, let's tweak that base part because I wasn't happy with it. The base part should actually be coming out just a little bit flat at the top and then having the slope. So I'm going to add an edge loop there. And I'm just going to reset this back to 0. So I'm going to copy that value. This way it's easier to manipulate this. So I'm going to move this up so it sits flush with the upper edge as well. So with that selected, I'm going to isolate that for a second. You can select the other vertices, faces and do H for hide. So you can see there I've just made that, I brought that up to the same level as the other one. I'm going to give it a small bevel as well. And Alt H to bring back any hidden geometry. And let's just paste that rotation value back in. And of course, because the other one's a linked duplicate, it's also updated. Now I've just realized that by making those changes, these loops are not going to be in the positions I want them to be. So I'm going to not quite straight. Let's just inset this bottom face first. That allows us to select these edge loops, just to delete those and recreate them again. Make sure that everything's nice and tidy. Let's put it back to 0 for a second. And I'm going to bring this down a little bit. So S for scale, Shift Z to lock the Z axis. Yeah, not so big, basically. So with that done, we can go back in and add those edge loops now. So press 2 to go to edge mode, select the edge loops. And with that done, Control B to bevel. There we go. And now we can paste back in the the rotation value in the x-axis. Great. Now let's have a look at this second button. So then I'm going to switch these back to some of their defaults like medium, point and global. Create a cylinder, 16 sides as before. Select the top face first, inset that by pressing I. Select the outer loop with Alt-click. I'm going to bevel this like so, but it's a much larger bevel. And this time we're going to use the 0.5 as the profile shape. Let's turn X-ray on, so bring these up just a little bit, these vertices. A little bit stubbier, it's too tall. And again, the bottom facing face, let's select that, press I to insert. And then with these edge loops at the bottom, the edge loop at the bottom, just bevel that as well. As before, segments 2, profile set to 1. If we add a subdiv modifier, levels to 2, you can see it's looking rather nice. Let's turn off the shadow now. Let's tab back into edit mode. And we'll select the bottom face there in the center. And I've copied that with Shift D, moved it down. And we'll delete the other one to leave the hole. We'll snap that back up there using vertex snapping, of course, which is enabled, and then hold down the control key to invoke the snapping. So let's scale that face up and extrude it downwards just a little bit. And press E to extrude, S for scale, and bring that out just a bit wider than the shape, the button shape, and then extrude it down again just a little bit. And again, I'm just going to select these and scale those and exclude the Z axis by pressing Shift Z. And create an inset at the bottom face. Now we just need some support in edge loops again. So as you can see, it's the same principles as before. I'll just turn the subdivision off for a second so we can select these inner edge loops here. There we go, and increase the mean crease to 1. And that would just make those a lot sharper and not smoothed out by the subdivision modifier. So that's pretty much it for this one. Very simple, a lot simpler than the other one. Let's just rename that as well. Let's switch to local so we can move that up and down on its axis. And just zoom in a little bit to see if that's placed correctly. I want to make that a little bit larger actually. So tab into edit mode, select everything by tapping the A key, press S for scale, and then go back to object mode, and then finalize the placement. And perhaps just a tiny bit of rotation maybe. Let's turn the shadow back off. Switch to wireframe mode and select these top vertices here. If you press the C key, C for Charlie, that your mouse pointer becomes a little brush and you can paint the selection that you want. So that's the little tip there. I just made that a little bit shorter, basically. Okay, great. So let's have a look at the meter now. So isolate that with the / or question mark key on your keyboard. Select the face at the front and press I to inset it. With that face selected, we can now delete that. So we now have a hole in there. We can select let's add a subdivision modifier first actually, and right click and shade smooth. We're going to select this edge just there and add mean bevel weight anyway, just to that outer edge. Add the bevel modifier, change it to weight as the limit method, shape to 1. Now we can turn on the wireframe there to see the amount of bevel we want to add. Let's turn off the subdivision modifier so we can see that. And that's looking okay so far. So let's switch these modifiers off now. And the idea is that I'll just quickly draw a shape here. We want this to come out like this. So it curves up and then down again. And in the middle there'll be some sort of, I wouldn't say a button, maybe a button if that's what it is. So let's just get rid of that. That's what we want to do. How are we going to do that? Let's select these vertices here. Let's just do one by one actually. Just move them up. Like that. So you get the rough shape there. Something like that. And once we turn the modifiers on, this will make a lot more sense once you see that in action. There you go. It's looking pretty good already. So with that done, let's add a couple of edge loops, cuts down that part there. And the reason we want to do that is we're going to select these edges, 6 of those there. And then we can use the loop tools again, add on, and select circle. And we're just going to scale that down a little bit. Something like that is fine. And that's going to be the basis for our button there. So let's tab into edit mode. Select these 2 faces and press I to inset it. But just make it a little bit larger. Press I to inset. Leave a little bit of a gap there. I think that's enough. There we go. And once with that, we have that. Let's do that again. Create another gap. Now we can select these faces here and press I to extrude. Sorry, E to extrude, not I. E to extrude. Let's switch to front view now with 1 on the numpad. Wireframe so you can see what's going on through there. Just bring that in just a little bit. Just switch to edge mode. Like before, we want to crease these edges here to make them sharp, basically. So select those and increase the mean crease to 1. Now, we just need to think about some supporting edge loops. We already have one on the outer, on the top there, as you can see. We need a couple more. So we need one inside. Just work with these ones first. So select these edges here. And Control B to add a small bevel to those. In fact, I'm going to inset those a little bit first because we want to pull those out so that the button is a little bit more rounded off as it comes out. So going back to these edges, let's just Control B and bevel those. Something like that. Yeah, I think that's fine. Okay, and we just need to add an edge loop in the center there. So Control R, just bring that in. If it's not quite in place, press G twice. So GG, you can slide that edge along. Let's make sure that's shaded smooth. Let's turn on our subdivision modifier and bevel modifier again. So let's have a quick look at that. That's looking pretty good. Obviously the back looks terrible, but we'll figure that out. Let's select the back face and delete it. I'm just going to make some tiny adjustments to this. You don't have to do this, of course. Do whatever you think looks good. Okay, let's pay some attention to the other parts of the meter now. So I've selected that inner edge there and pressed E to extrude. And that's along the x-axis. So that gives it a little bit of thickness there. And I'm going to add a mean bevel weight to that edge as well, so that it gets nicely beveled. Makes that look nice and sharp. So select the back edge now, duplicate it, scale it down, and press F to fill. And that's going to be the face of the meter. That's why I flipped the normals there. I want it facing the other way, outwards. So I'm going to bring that in somewhere like that. And I'm going to scale that out just shy of the outer shell. But still the gap there, you can see from the red. But we'll come to that later on. Let's turn our modifiers back on. And with that selected, press Shift S, cursor to selected. And now we're going to add a plane. Object mode, this is not edit mode. Do this in object mode. Rotate the plane. Oops, let's rotate it on the y-axis actually, by 90 degrees, so it's facing outwards. And we're going to tab into edit mode and S for scale. Bring that right down. As you can probably guess, this is going to be the needle that moves. So I'm going to move this back to medium, point, and global. Switch to vertex mode. And I'm going to scale these in the y-axis. Make that rather thin. Before we do that, let's just move this down where we want our pivot point to actually be. So somewhere around there, behind the curved part, select those two faces. In fact, it doesn't really matter if you select all of them. You can see there, if we rotate it in object mode, that's where we want to pivot from. So bring those bottom vertices down, hide it behind there, maybe bring that up. Now you want to switch to object mode, press R to rotate, to see how far that can go, the limits of that rotation. Bear in mind, we're going to add a pointy part there. So that's what I'm thinking here, is I don't want to make it too tall. But we'll make adjustments later anyway. So I'm going to switch to edge mode, select that top edge. And then select the two side edges, E to extrude, S for scale, and then Y on the Y-axis. That gives us this little shovel, I guess. Let's zoom in. Select these top vertices and scale them in. Looking for more of a pointy tip here. We can select the two inner ones and distribute those a bit more evenly first, and then bring them up just a touch. So we'll do in a minute. Let's make some loop cuts first here. A couple of loop cuts across there. And we'll just bring this one in at the top here. Let's just distribute these a bit more evenly again. Scale this down some more. And now we can select those two inner ones there, or the edge in the center, and bring that up to more of a point. I'm going to add a couple of bevels here just to round it off a little bit. Might be a little bit overkill. So that's okay. Let's bring it down now that we've tested the rotation limits. That's about right. I think that looks good. And we'll bring that out between the face and the outer shell. You may need to switch to side view here and wireframe again to see where that's going. The other thing it needs now is some thickness. Let's add a solidify modifier, check even thickness, normal is high quality, just in case, and bring down the thickness. I went with 0.003. That would depend on the scale of your object, of course. And that's as much as it needs, really. It doesn't need much more than that because it is going to be quite small. I'm going to auto smooth that as well. Right click, shade smooth. For some reason it turns off auto smooth, so we're going to have to enable that again. Let's turn off face orientation now. And let's work on the remainder of the meter. So let's select the back edge, turn off the modifiers. Let's switch to the front view by pressing 1 on the numpad. Switch to the back view by pressing Control 1. And that will give you the alternate view. So move this out a little bit first as an object, in object mode. Move it out. It gives us a bit more space to work with. So in edit mode, with that edge selected at the back, first let's add a couple of loop cuts here actually. And select these face loops here. So E to extrude, S for scale, Shift X to lock out the X axis. Very shallow, but it gives it a bit more interest. And we'll select these edges. Oops, we've got a bit of a problem here. We've got the intersecting inner face there. So I didn't realize that's what's going to happen just yet, so I'll figure it out in a second. So it's that face right in there. That's the one. We just move that out. Again, we need to switch off these modifiers. Let's just do this first. So add a mean bevel weight, and that tightens that up nicely. And let's address this face. Let's put that back in a better position. Again, switch to front view if you need to, and then wireframe mode, so you can see how far away we are from there. So I think I'll give this a bit more space here at the front. Now we can select that face again. Push it back to where we think it should be. Bear in mind, we're going to add a glass element as well in front of that. That's why we're leaving this amount of gap. And the needle, of course, which I've just pushed behind by moving that. I'm going to bring that in front of the plate, of course, in that gap just there. There's our face and there's the front. Put it in the middle. And that's fine. Okay, with that fiddly stuff done, let's continue with the back. So tab into edit mode. I'm going to Shift D to duplicate those, right click to leave it in place, and move it away from the other geometry. Let's separate that as a new object. So now we have this object here. Select the back face edge, should I say, E to extrude, S for scale. And that gives it a nice beveled edge there as well, with a mean bevel weight. And let's go into this object now. Let's reset its origin. Switch to wireframe, select these vertices here. We're going to snap those just like that. And select these back ones and move them in somewhere like that. Let's turn the X-ray off. Let's select this edge loop here. Let's have a think about this actually. Isolate that with the / key. And I'm going to select both of these. Press E to extrude, S for scale, Shift X. I noticed while I was turning the face orientation that the scope glass was actually red, which is not good. That means it's facing the wrong way. Let's just turn the alpha back to 1. So let's just move this out for a second and tap into edit mode. Press A to select everything. Press Alt-N to bring up the menu and recalculate normals. And that tends to fix it. Or recalculate outside. So with that done, let's go back to the meter. Let's quickly rename this. Let's call that a gasket. Why not? And we're going to Shift D to duplicate the object. Bring it further in. Quickly rename that to seal. Let's isolate that with the / key. Let's delete these faces here that are facing inwards. Select the edge there, turn off the mean bevel weight. Just need it on the other side there. We can then hold down the Control key, move our mouse somewhere there, and it will snap to the nearest vertex. That gives us a nice seal there. And now we can go back to this object mode, in edit mode, sorry. Select the back edge loop and bring it through the body of the ray gun. So I've added a loop cut in there as well. So I've now realized I want to bring this out a little bit more. I want a bit more space to work with. So let's bring that something like that. Tap back into here. You can see I've added a loop cut there. I'm going to bring that back a little bit. Now you could just leave it like this actually. You could just intersect it with the body and leave it at that. But I wanted to try something new, learn some new techniques. So I'm going to add a shrink wrap modifier to this. Use the eyedropper to select the ray gun body. And of course, that's going to shrink wrap that flat, completely flat to the body, which we don't want. Here's one thing we can do. Let's select these inner vertices. Oops, I should have clicked on the X-ray, or just alt-click there. Select all of those vertices. Head over to the vertex properties there. Create a new vertex group. Hit assign and rename the group to whatever you like. I'm going to call it seal base. And you can see that's working. We've got those now added to a vertex group. Let's go back to our modifier. Turn that on. You can see here we've got a vertex group option. So select seal base. Something very cool happens. It only applies a shrink wrap modifier to that vertex group. So it limits the influence of the modifier. However, it still doesn't look tidy. So you've still got some work to do. I'm going to increase the subdivision on the body first. Let's move the shrink wrap above the subdivision modifier. That will look much better. That's actually pretty good to leave as is. Add a bevel to this one here. And bring that back just a touch. And we'll select this edge here. And that hasn't made a huge difference. So let's head over to this space again. And under shape keys this time, like in object mode, click the plus button. So that's our basis now. Just click plus again, and we'll create another shape key, and we'll call this one flared. So we tab into edit mode with that shape key selected. Let's isolate that first, select these vertices. Now we can manipulate those just by scaling them up like this. And that is now part of that shape key. So if we switch back to object mode and we change the value slider, you can see how it goes from the basis shape key, transitions into the flared shape key. So we can use that to see if that gives us a better fit. So let's increase the value of that flare. That's looking really cool. That's working pretty well. But how is it looking with the intersection? You can see it's intersected more now into the body. So ideally we don't want that, but it's not the end of the world if we leave it like that and just increase the subdivisions on the seal part. But I want to try and figure this out and see if we can get a better result here. So back in the shape key now on the flared, I'm going to scale in the y-axis a little bit so we have this oval shape now rather than a perfect circle. See if that helps a little bit. That still looks good. And you could leave it like that. There's nothing wrong with that. If you're happy with that, just skip to the next part in the video. I think target normal project ended up being a little bit better than the other options. in this case anyway. Your mileage may vary on other projects, but certainly in this instance, it seemed to work a little bit better. So I think we'll go for that actually. And just quickly finishing off the part of the body at the back where we have this pinching going on, the bane of all subdivisions and cylinders and UV spheres. Let's switch to that view there, select that face in the back and delete it. And with the edge selected, the face loop, I'm going to press F to fill it. And we're going to try grid fill. Obviously that didn't work because there's a face there. So select the face, select the edge loop again, go to face, grid fill, and see if this gives us a better result. Let's tab back into edit mode and see if we can tidy this up a little bit. And to be fair, you can just select what was there previously and create an inset, a smaller inset, and that will eventually mitigate that issue. Let's try the loop tool circle method. So I'm going to create a circular shape instead of a grid fill with the same edges. Let's go back into edit mode, turn the subdivision modifier back off. Let's have a little think about this again. Select all of these edges here. Control delete didn't work. That's actually dissolving them, but it still made a mess. F to fill, I to inset. I'm just trying to figure out the best way to do this, and yeah, we can certainly make these into quads, but we still have what we had before. If that's what you want, that's not too bad. I mean, it's not terrible. It's not ideal, but no, that doesn't look good. Maybe let's try bringing this edge loop out just a little. And you can clearly still see the shade in there. I think part of the problem is that I've got cavity turned on in the overlays and the viewport. And I have noticed in certain places it does show up these things a lot more than it would do if it didn't have cavity on. So it could be that I'm just being sidetracked by having that. So for now, let's just leave that and duplicate the gasket. Go into the gasket object first, duplicate it, those faces there, slide it across. Let's change this to center for the snapping on the vertices. That would line up perfectly with that edge, existing edge. What we need to do now is press S for scale, Shift Y, and bring that down. So we've got a nice clean gasket again. And I think that's going to do it for part 3. Please join me in part 4. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.